Assalamu alaikum, Peggy Muhammad here. Welcome to Live Right, Think Right, Eat Right, Do Right from Mosque number 48 in Dallas, Texas. Let's begin our presentation about diabetes right now. There's the entire message to the Muslim followers of the most honorable Elijah Muhammad about diabetes. Once again, I always have a disclaimer. So I am not a physician, nor am I a dietitian. I do not diagnose or treat anyone with a medical, surgical, psychiatric, dietary condition or disease. The information I present is for the purpose of education only. If you are seeing a physician or other qualified healthcare clinician and want to try something you have seen or heard, please consult your healthcare clinician before doing so. Thank you. There is no verification necessary for the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad from How to Eat to Live. The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad does not need any scholar or scientist to verify what he wrote about diabetes and How to Eat to Live. All the credit goes to Allah in the person of Master Fard Muhammad. In this presentation, I tell you what the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad wrote about the prevention of diabetes type 2 and the solution. Then I compare it to what the modern day scholars and doctors say about it today. Here's the message, which includes the problem. A high percentage of blood sugar is a very dominant thing among the people, but that blood sugar can be controlled if you eat right. There is almost an epidemic of too much sugar accumulating in our blood. America's people consume more sweets than any other people on earth. They love their sweet, fat pies, cookies, and cakes at every meal. America has more bitter trouble with her health. Eating too many sweets piles up sugar in the blood, and it becomes the enemy of our lives. Our blood is our life. That he wrote in the book, How to Eat to Live, Volume 1 in 1967, and then there was a volume in 1972. So, in this century, in this decade, the US ranks #1 in the world in terms of the annual retail volume of consumed sugar, chocolate, and gum. Now, that was from 2015. And in that article from US News and World Report, it was predicted that in 2016, it would be even higher. Also, look, there is a steady increase in the amount of sugar per person since 1700. I didn't know they were taking figures or taking statistics in 1700, but in 1700, it looks like people ate 4 pounds of sugar per year. Then by 1800, 100 years later, they were doing 20 pounds per year, which is 5 times as much. And then in 1900, 90 pounds per year. And then in 2012, half of Americans consume 180 pounds of sugar per year. That was found in Fast Facts About Sugar Consumption. By the way, it was written by a dentist. Okay. Now, the problem today, now he said in 1967 that we were almost in epidemic proportions, but diabetes was declared an epidemic by the Centers for Disease Control in 1994. Now, diabetes has increased significantly in both sexes, every age group, every racial and ethnic group, and all educational levels. Pediatric clinics, once the sole domain of type 1 diabetes, are now overrun with an epidemic of obese adolescents with type 2 diabetes. More statistics. There are approximately 38.4 million people in the United States of America who have diabetes. That's roughly 11.6% of the population, and 90 to 95% of those people have type 2 diabetes. Then there are 29.7 million diagnosed. Then there's 8.7 not aware. So how does that happen, and how do they get that statistic? Well, many times if a person's blood is collected and it's going to be tested for diabetes, that person may or may not know that they are being tested for that. And then someone talks to them and says, listen, you, according to these statistics, according to this, you have diabetes. Your blood sugar is greater than 126 milligrams per deciliter, and this was fasting. And generally that means you have diabetes. I think you need to see the doctor. So that's how that works. And believe it or not, 352,000 children and adolescents below the age of 20 are diabetic. But 304,000 of those have type 1 diabetes. So that means that the rest have type 2. That's a lot of people. So what causes type 2 diabetes? Now, you heard what the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad said. He said it was eating too much sugar. So here is what Dr. Jason Fung says in his book, The Diabetes Code. At its very core, type 2 diabetes can be understood as a disease caused by too much insulin, which our bodies secrete when we eat too much sugar. We must lower our insulin levels by reducing our dietary intake of sugar and refined carbohydrates, which is a form of sugar. Insulin is the main driver of fat storage. And if you are constantly eating, you are triggering insulin production all day long. And when people have too much insulin, their cells start to resist the insulin. And in response, the body has to make more. So, okay, I'll tell you how that looks. And I think I might have explained this one other time. But let's go ahead and read this before I go ahead and give you that example. The body has trouble using the insulin it's making. And this is called insulin resistance. And it causes your blood sugar to rise higher than normal. At first, your pancreas makes more insulin to make up for this. Over time, though, insulin resistance gets worse. Eventually, the pancreas no longer produces insulin. And I'm going to give you an example of how this looks. Brother, sister, you're young, you're in your 20s. You are smart, you work hard, and you play hard. So, sister, after work, you're on a volleyball team, and that's what you love to do, and you play volleyball every time you get a chance. Brother, you play basketball every time you get a chance. And you do that very well when you're young. That's in your 20s. And if anyone were to do a random blood sugar, let's say that random blood sugar would be 80. Okay, so you're doing good. But as you grow older, maybe a few more years, you get married, you get a family, and then you have more responsibility, both at home and at work. And so you're still working hard, but you're not playing as hard. You spend a lot more time at work, maybe, a lot more time at home doing what you usually do at home with the children and with your family, taking them here and taking them there. You don't get to play hard like you used to. But still, if you were to go to your position, your blood sugar is still around 80. It doesn't seem like there's anything going on, does it? Okay, so now you're getting older. Maybe you're in your 40s. You're not as active at all. And because of the stress, you're probably eating more of your comfort food. And so when you go to the doctor, your blood sugar goes a little bit higher, but it's still within normal limits. And this continues until you're in your 50s and you've got some that are going to college. You're still working hard, still a lot of responsibility, doing very well in your own business or in your position, in your place of employment. So you're doing well, but it's a lot of responsibility, a lot of stress. And so you're eating more and more of those kinds of foods that make you feel good, that don't make you feel so stressed. But it's time for you to go to the doctor again. And this time in your 50s, you've got this blood sugar of 126. And then the doctor tells you, well, that's generally type 2 diabetes. But we don't really want to just make that diagnosis by just that. Let's see what your blood pressure is. So now your blood pressure is greater than 130 over 85, and your waist is a little bit wider. And so those things are happening to you. And oh, by the way, your cholesterol is a little bit high. Your good cholesterol's too low. So yeah, I think you've got type 2 diabetes. And then you're sitting there wondering, how could this happen? Well, this is how it happens. So your pancreas, like the rest of your organs, is a rock star. And like all rock stars, it shows out to do very, very well. You can't keep it from doing what it's supposed to do. One day it just gets too tired, falls off the stage. I can't do it anymore. And then the manager says, well, this rock star won't be coming out for the next year or two. It's terribly fatigued. And that's about how that works. So now you have diabetes and you have to take some measures so that you don't die from diabetes or that you don't have any problems from diabetes. So what are the risk factors? The highest risk factors are those if you're 45 years and older, if you're overweight, if you have a parent or sibling who has diabetes, if you're physically inactive, if you're a woman who has had gestational diabetes, one of your past pregnancies, and if you have 3 of these criteria from metabolic syndrome. So if if the man's waist circumference is over 40 inches, and for the woman over 35, if you have a low high density HDL, which means your good cholesterol, if it's less than 40 if you're a male and less than 50 if you're female, or you have high triglycerides, if they're greater than 150 or taking medication for it, if you have high blood pressure, 135 over 85, and you're taking medication for it, and if you have a fasting glucose of over 100, any 3 of those will give you metabolic syndrome, and that means you're on your way to diabetes. Or you may already have diabetes, as I've said. So, but if you're on your way to diabetes, male, female, adult, or child, and we're talking about type 2 diabetes, you might have noticed if you're heavy, and you might have noticed this in yourself or in other people, it's something called acanthosis nigricans. And it's a dark, thick, velvety patch of skin, generally on the back of the neck. That's where we mostly see it. Because if we see you out in public, we're going to see it on your neck. But if you have it, you might see it on your neck. You might see it in your armpits. And I have photographs of those that you can see later. It might be in your groin or your face, like right here, in your elbows, on your knees, in your knuckles, or in your umbilical area around your navel. And as I said, it generally occurs with obesity. And that indicates that you might be insulin resistant. You may also notice skin tags. Now, any of these signs may indicate that you're on your way to diabetes, but there are other reasons that you could have these too. For skin tags, they're overgrowths of the skin on the neck, the back, the chest. This generally means insulin resistance. But as I said, there could be different reasons for skin tags, and there could be different reasons for acanthosis nigricans. For instance, there could be another hormonal problem, or it could be a tumor of some sort. You could also have frequent infections that heal slowly. And maybe that's something that you notice about yourself or someone very close to you. You kind of wonder about that. Why am I always getting an infection? Especially in a woman when you're getting frequent yeast infections. Or periodontal disease. That's something that a lot of people don't really think about when it comes to diabetes. But if you're insulin resistant or maybe pre-diabetic or diabetic, you might have periodontal disease. You'll have bad teeth, loose teeth, bad breath, all of that. And then once you get the diagnosis and then you understand what's going on with you, then you understand, oh, I've had that for a while. Once you get diabetes, this is what it really means now. When you get diabetes, your glucose levels rise above the kidney's ability to reabsorb the glucose. Then it spills over into the urine, causing frequent excessive urination and severe thirst. Then there's the chronic loss of glucose, and that may lead to rapid weight loss. It simply means that your body is just trying to get rid of all of that sugar in your blood, and so it's doing it through your kidneys. So you will have frequent urination. This goes for adults and children. Severe thirst. I remember seeing this on a television program where a woman was explaining about her daughter that one day she just started drinking. She just couldn't stop drinking. She'd get up in the morning and then just drink loads of orange juice and then continue with this thirst throughout the day until she went to the doctor and she found out she had type 1 diabetes. You get increased hunger despite your weight loss. So if you're a diabetic, but you may not know it, you might have been bigger. And then you start having these other problems, but you're not gaining weight. You're losing a lot of weight. You may have nausea and vomiting, fatigue, loss of vision. Many people think they have the flu. I know a gentleman that this happened to twice. He didn't really deal with it the first time. Then it happened again and it was worse and he almost died. So the consequences of denial and mismanagement. Okay, so let's talk about denial. So denial means that you have not accepted the fact that you could possibly be diabetic. So it's like someone telling you that you are now a diabetic. You've been thin all your life. You've been very active, but your diet hasn't been very well. You eat a lot of sweets and so forth. But it seems like it's been under control because you're a runner. You're very active, but you're doing this thing called grazing. You're eating all the time and making your insulin go up all the time, trying to catch that blood sugar. So this is something that you don't want to deny. It may not feel good, but think about this. You and millions of other people in the United States of America and across the planet have diabetes. It's a scourge of the 2000s. It's a scourge of the 21st century, which, if you recall the previous slide, that it was considered an epidemic in the United States by CDC in 1994. So here are some other things that might happen to you if you mismanage your diabetes. For instance, this something called central scalp hair loss. Now, the Black Women's Health Study, which has been around since, I believe, 1994, 1995, maybe 1995 and 1996, they put out a 2019 newsletter. And see, they have participants, 6,000 survey participants. And actually, I'm one of those participants. And what happened is that we receive these surveys every year, and we answer the questions to the best of our ability. And what they found in relationship to diabetes and hair loss was this, that women with type 2 diabetes have a 70% greater risk for central scalp hair loss than women who do not have diabetes type 2. Now, there are a lot of reasons for hair loss, but diabetes can be one of them. It doesn't mean that just because you have diabetes, you're going to lose your hair. And it doesn't mean that everyone that has lost their hair is due to diabetes. But this is a very positive correlation, at least according to this dietary survey. You're at higher risk for periodontal disease, which affects your gums and your bones that hold the teeth in place. And it's very slow healing of infections. So you get tooth loss. It's hard to chew. So your diet is bad. You get chronic bad breath. So people don't want to be around you. They really wonder what's going on with you. And you get this dry mouth. If you continue to mismanage your diabetes, there's changes in blood vessels, which can cause retinopathy or loss of vision, and diabetes is one of the reasons that you can lose your vision, one of the reasons. Also, hypertension. Generally, if you are insulin resistant, then it moves on to diabetes. You usually find out that you also have high blood pressure. And so you get retinopathy. So you get your damage in nerves of your eyes, get high blood pressure, heart disease. So when you have the diagnosis of diabetes, it is the #1 risk factor for heart disease. It is also a risk factor in kidney disease. It's called kidney disease, kidney failure, chronic kidney disease, moving on to kidney failure. And so as an industry, it's 100,000 people are diagnosed yearly with kidney failure, and 557,000 are in dialysis, and 44% of that is due to diabetes at a cost of $27.4 billion. It is a $27.4 billion industry. I don't think I have to tell you the number of dialysis units in your city or your side of town, because they're everywhere. It can cause neuropathy or damage to your nerves, changes in the nerves so that they interfere with pain perception from the extremities. And then you can also get stomach paralysis. So you have this tingling and burning sensation in your fingers and your toes, and it's difficult for you to walk, and it's very painful. You have to take medication for it. Then if it goes on further, you can get stomach paralysis so that your stomach stops working very well. You have a lot of other problems, and that becomes a problem of surgical intervention. Then you have atherosclerosis. So you have too much sugar causes inflammation, which leads to plaque in the blood vessels, and peripheral vascular disease, PVD, and that can lead to amputations of the lower extremities. And you can also have stroke from atherosclerosis. You know, at one time, when our antecedents were slaves, if they ran away from the plantation, one of the punishments was to have an amputation of their feet or their toes. Now, today, African Americans, Black people, we have some of the highest rates of amputation due to diabetes. And also, you can have some cancers, liver, pancreas, endometrium, so that's within your uterus, your breast cancer, bladder, colorectal regions. This is from the magazine Diabetes Care. So the reason is because, a lot of times we know insulin as being the reason that glucose goes into your blood cell. But insulin stores fat. Insulin makes tissue grow. When it comes to screening, remember when I told you about acanthosis nigricans? This is what it looks like. What you see here to your right, I believe, you might. Well, anyway, I'm pointing at an underarm. I am pointing at an armpit. And you see the person's skin, and then in this area, it's dark. And that might seem to be a normal thing because after all, it's in a crease and it tends to be darker in a crease. But then this is considered acanthosis nigricans. And you may also see it on someone's neck. This is someone's neck on the side, and you see this dark area on the neck. Diabetes was determined to be one test that children have to have in school, a screening test that children need to have. So the 77th legislature decided that children need to be screened for diabetes along with problems of their spine. I'll think of that in a minute. It's called as a spinal problem, curvature of the spine. So children get screened for that, and then they're screened for vision and hearing, and then they're screened for diabetes by getting an examination by the nurse to determine if they have any areas of acanthosis nigricans. And so if that happens, and that will happen, that screening happens in the first grade, third grade, fifth grade, the seventh grade. So it screens for high insulin levels. Then they will get a blood pressure screening, and then someone will look at their BMI, and then their parents will be notified. And if you happen to be one of those parents, please get this taken care of. Please. It doesn't go away with washing. It doesn't go away with any type of creams. It just gets worse and worse as you become more, as the person becomes more and more insulin resistant, finally diabetes. So this is what happens in children in the state of Texas. Also, adults, if you do not have a physician, but you need to get a diabetic screening or want one, just contact me. You know me, Peggy Muhammad, at Peggy Muhammad 60 at gmail.com. That's my email address. Or you can just, if you see me in the mosque, just talk to me and we'll see what we can set up. Okay. Now, the solution, Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad said in How to Eat to Live on page 23, surely sugar diabetes can be controlled and driven out with your abstinence from eating sugar and starchy foods and with your corrected way of eating. Now, your corrected way of eating is what I like to call How to Eat to Live. Some people call it the way of eating or the habit of eating, How to Eat to Live for the book. But I like to call it your corrected way of eating. And he said, and with your corrected way of eating, once a day, if started in time, you will be negative of sugar in your blood. That's on page 23. He said sugar diabetes can be controlled and cured if you only eat correctly. Stay off sugar and starchy foods and leave those old white potatoes alone. Do not eat spaghetti and macaroni at every meal. Now, if you are overweight, which is a sign that you could be diabetic, do not eat it at any meal. If you want to live a long time, remember that it's processed and hard to digest. He said, do not eat it at any meal. And he said, by eating one meal a day, some chronic diseases, to include type 2 diabetes, will vanish in a few years as they fail to get the poison that will keep them alive. And when I say them, I mean the poison. Sometimes they vanish within a few months. But if you eat the right foods and eat only one meal a day or every 2 days, then that can happen for you. That's in book 2. In order to avoid diabetes, this is what he says to do. You eat one meal a day, preferably between the hours of 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. One meal a day. So if you ate between 4 and 6, you stop eating at 6. So you stop eating from 6, go until the next day. Do not eat again until you start it for the next day. That's 24 hours of fasting. That's better than some intermittent fasting. That's one meal a day. And then, but in between the meals, no soda, no juices, no milk. That's a meal. You may have water or coffee, no snacks. And then once a month, you fast for 3 days. Okay, that's really good for you. To avoid diabetes, you must limit all kinds of sugar to include high fructose corn syrup and anything else that might be very sugary, like I think agave, like that agave syrup, all these different types of syrups, and there's a lot of different ways to say sugar, like dextrose. Did you know that sugar isn't just about everything? If you buy this processed salt with the little girl on the blue box, do you know that that salt has dextrose in it? So even your salt that you might use has sugar in it. So all kinds of sugars, limit that and limit the starchy foods. That's to keep you from developing diabetes. Also, avoid the B crappie. The B stands for bread and bread products. So all your snack foods, your pretzels and all kinds of bread kind of chips, pita chips and all that sort of thing. Corn. He said we're not supposed to eat corn unless it's in the milk stage, and it's only good for 2 weeks in the milk stage. And it's hard to digest. And anyway, most of the corn in America is either sweet corn, corn for animals, and that corn tends to be GMO. And we really don't know that much about GMO. We don't think it's good, so that's not a good idea. He said rice. Rice is a friend to diabetes. Let's talk about rice right here. Brothers and sisters, I know that you know that at one time we were the premier rice growers in America. And our antecedents were brought over here specifically to grow rice on the plantations because the plantation owners didn't know how to grow rice. So when they knew where a slave was coming from, like the Senegambia, they said, okay, those are rice growing Black people. So those are rice growing Africans from West Africa. We need them to grow rice for us. And what they were trying to do is sell rice to the Europeans more cheaply than the Asians. Why? Asians grow rice. Africans also grow rice. And wherever they were in the diaspora, they grew rice. In the West Indies, in South America, North America. Wherever you could grow rice, they were the rice growers. The rice that grew in West Africa at one time was called, well, I don't know if they grow that kind anymore. It was called Sativa glamourima. No, it was called Ariza glamourima. And the one from Asia was called Ariza sativa. And then there are many other varieties of Ariza sativa. We grew, or in West Africa, they grew a separate kind of rice that was called Ariza glamourima. That's a beautiful name. But I don't even think that during the time that our antecedents were slaves, that they always grew Ariza glamourima. I think they also started to grow Asian rice. And so, but I will tell you this, that rice growing is very hard work. It's laborious work. It was called woman's work by the men on the plantation, by the African men on the plantation. They said that was women's work because that's what women did. If you recall in the book Roots, Kunta Kinte's mother, Binta Kinte, had a rice field. Okay, no one works that hard anymore. So he said, don't eat rice. But because there's mercy in the diet, he has allowed us to continue to eat rice. You know, you do what you want to do. I mean, no one's the rice Nazi. So you're going to eat rice. But he said that you could prepare rice in a certain way so that it won't hurt you as readily. Remember, as readily. And I think the secret is that I read once, not in How to Eat to Live, but the more you cook rice, the less it will hurt you. So I think you're able to remove a little bit of the carbohydrate. But remember, rice is carbohydrate. That's just it. Rice is starchy carbohydrate, fine carbohydrate. So it's cooked 3 times the way he wants us to do. It's called browning. And you start with parboiled rice. This is a Black woman's, this is a Black African woman's technology. It's her science and technology. She's the one that developed parboiling. And I think the woman also in Asia developed parboiling. So parboiling is a form of cooking the rice that allows most of the nutrients to stay in. Maybe not as much as brown rice, but more than white rice. So it's cooked once, parboiled, you buy that, and then you brown it or pop it in a little bit of oil or a little bit of butter till it pops, and that's a cooking. And then you cook it again, either on top of the stove or in the oven. So that's cooked 3 times. But eventually, if you don't want to get diabetes, you're trying to avoid diabetes, you will have to avoid eating rice. Take your rice, put it in a bowl, and put it someplace and say, thank you, rice. We understand that rice is a connection between the Africans here in America and the ones in Africa. So, especially West Africa. That is our connection. It's rice. But as I said, who works that hard? Try to avoid the rice. Also, no oats, starchy, potatoes, starchy. As he said on page 4, that rice and potatoes are friends to diabetes. And pasta, too hard to digest. And then there are other processed foods. So we have too much sugar, too much salt, harmful oils and chemicals in those processed foods. The best diet is the plant-based whole food. Plant-based whole food diet is best. Read How to Eat to Live, books 1 and 2. He said the best menu is a vegetarian menu. He said people that are vegetarians live longer. So if you are a diabetic, if you are pre-diabetic, or if you've been told you're insulin resistant, avoid bee crappie completely. Okay? You have to, and in addition to your dietary changes, you have to include other healthy lifestyle habits such as regular physical activity, regular sunshine, sleep, prayer, meditation, sleep, prayer, especially meditation to reduce your bad stress. I know it's easier said than done. That's something we have to do. We have to understand. What you can do is go back and look at the video I did on stress. That's the very first one I did. That'll give you an idea. It doesn't tell you what to do, but it can give you an idea of what stress is really all about. And maybe at a future time, I can do something about ways that we can reduce stress. So I think I'd like to go back to this before I close it out. Now, I think I'll just go ahead and end it here. And I will stop the share, but I have a story for you about this. So here's a story. Eric Adams is the current mayor of New York City. 2016, when his story begins, or his journey with diabetes begins, occurs when he was a borough president. And I've forgotten which borough, but I believe he was around 56 or 57. And he was a man who came from a family that had diabetes. His mother had diabetes. She had several sisters that had diabetes. He has siblings that had diabetes and uncles that have diabetes. So he thought that for him to have diabetes was going to be inevitable. So in 2016, he woke up one day and he couldn't see the clock. And he hung around to see if it got any better. He also had this pain in his side. But he had been suffering from that pain in his side for a long time. But he said he did the manly thing and just sucked it up, just sucked up the idea that, oh, it's not that bad, it'll get better. And I'm not a little punk, so I've got to get manly through it. Go manly through it. Go manly through this pain. So he did. But when he went blind, he also thought about this pain and he thought that he had colon cancer. So he went to the hospital. And when he left, by the time he left the hospital, he was diagnosed with diabetes. That is why that's why he was blind. The pain was an ulcer. He also had high blood pressure. And from the diabetes, he had neuropathy in his hands and feet. And even one of his thighs was going numb. So he was really in bad shape. So he was placed on, I believe he was placed on insulin, medicine for his high blood pressure, medicine for the neuropathy, and I believe medicine for the ulcer. And on his way out, someone gave him a pamphlet and it said, "Living with Diabetes." And I guess his inner voice said, no, we're not doing this. So he was in front of the computer, he said, and he was going to type in living with diabetes. And then he said something just said, no, say reversal of diabetes. And when he did that, he found a physician that helped people uh, with diabetes through their diet. And so, to make a long story short, he got on a whole foods, plant based diet. I cannot remember how long it took, but he said he got his vision back. He said he no longer had the neuropathy. He said his blood pressure got better. And he said his ulcer got better. So he had a reversal of all of those chronic diseases by going to a whole foods plant-based diet. I can't tell you if he did any fasting, but the main thing was a whole foods plant-based diet. Just Google him, Google his story, Google the diabetic journey of Eric Adams, and you will read. He has several videos, and you can listen to those videos. And so that's all I really have to tell you today about diabetes. But if you haven't been to the physician recently, you should be screened. You should make an appointment to find out if you have metabolic syndrome. And if you have any of the symptoms or any of the signs that say you're on your way to diabetes, please go to the physician and get that checked. So have a nice day. Assalamu alaikum. I'll see you again. Oh, yes. Let me not forget. Ta-da. Live right, think right, eat right, do right. Assalamu alaikum. I'll just keep on these glasses.